questions that lead us. You see, we are human beings. And the questions of life, the questions of illness, the questions of God, the questions of faith have been with us ever since the beginning of time. Not only going back to Moses, but before Moses, to the story and to the life of Jesus, where Jesus was asked many questions. And when Jesus was asked questions, people started listening. And today we have that question that Thomas asked Jesus, Lord, how can we know the way? How can we know the way? Every week I look on the internet at a particular site. It's called workingpreacher.com. It's a great little site that you can go to and hear people's reflections on the gospel reading. And Dr. David Lose, who's from Luther Seminary, writes an article every week about the gospel reading. So you get some little insights on the questions that people might ask. And this particular Sunday, he had the title of his article was The Hardest Questions. I hope God's not telling me something. Maybe I should listen. But in his article, he said, as pastors and as preachers, maybe we should challenge our members of our congregation to ask questions. And he said, this is a question that you might want to ask them. If they were to see God face to face, what is one question that they would ask God? And I want you to think about that for a moment. If you were to have one question to ask God, what that might be this morning, on this Sunday morning. Now, if I was really courageous, I could tell you to look at your neighbor and tell them that question. But I want you to think about it, and I want you to think about what that question might be. I know for me, some of the questions might be, why, God, is there suffering in the world? Another question might be, is everyone going to be saved, or is there only one way to be saved? Some of you might have heard the discussion about Robert Bell's book, the title of his book is entitled Love Wins. And he's created a great stir in the Christian world because he's challenged people to think about heaven and hell, and challenged people by asking them, do you think that a loving God would create hell and fire to go on to innocent people in life? You think God would actually cause people to suffer and to burn in hell? And people are stirred by that question. Stirred by that question whether God, our loving God, would do something like that. And I don't know where your mind is going, but I start thinking about that myself. And what kind of God do I believe in? Robert Bell has a pretty good theory going about God's love and about a God who loves us. But then we get scared to think about having that conversation. Someone I was talking to said to me, I think we limit our understanding of God by the way we personally see God. And I think that's a challenge for us in life, to see how far and how big, how wide, how deep, how long is our God who loves us. Maybe that's a question that we could ask God. We also ask God, where is God in the suffering in the world? Where is God in this house, this life that we live? Christians often suffer from short-sightedness, and I hope that we can broaden that on this Sunday. I hope that we can ask God to open our eyesight to the message of God's love. I find it rather fun to take this gospel reading on this Sunday because we all have these connections with this gospel reading. And I know that when you read it this Sunday morning, what was one thing, I know there was one part in that gospel reading that all of us were going, the older generation, I would say, was doing this. In my Father's house are many, help me out. See, that's the old thought, is in our many mansions. Of course, some of you did say many rooms because that's the new translation of that. But just the thought of that image that God's mansion or God's house has many rooms. Many rooms is not as broad as mansions, but when you think about mansions, how often do we close in that part of our understanding of God's house, that it is just for us? A mansion is pretty big, and the image of our God, how big is our God? How far can God go at welcoming? Someone said, is God's house in foreclosure? And I thought that was interesting. Because don't we limit that? Don't we limit our understanding of God? Today is a question we ask. Today God comes to us and wonders about our own journey and our own questions. Thomas was wondering about where Jesus was going. And I don't blame them, because they were thinking like we might be thinking. When a loved one is sick or someone is dying, we have this fear. We have this, what's going to happen to us? Thomas was fearful where Jesus was going. Jesus says, and I always find this interesting, because Jesus says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. What does someone say to you when you're grieving about something? Oh, don't worry about it. Jesus, I don't think, means that. And one thing is that Jesus isn't a therapist who says, how are you feeling about that? See, Jesus isn't saying that. Nor does he say the line that Dr. Phil says, how's that working for you? Have you heard that line? How's that working for you? Jesus isn't saying that. He just says, believe. Believe in God, believe also in me. And then there's that Philip who's standing on the side, and he says to Jesus, he says, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied. I read that line this week, and I thought, that's often the way we are in life. If you only do this, God, I'll be satisfied. How much does God have to give us in order for us to be satisfied in life? Philip is like all of us. We want more. We want this image. We want this understanding of God. God comes to us to challenge us. Jesus says, if you want to know God, look at me. Pretty clear for us to understand that if we want to figure out who God is to look at Jesus. And what did Jesus do? Jesus fed, Jesus led, Jesus healed, Jesus held on to, and Jesus loved people. Our message of faith is that if we have any questions about God, look to Jesus. Look to Jesus, because that's who we know. Sometimes I have conversations with people, and they will say to me, well, do you think there's another way? Do you think our vast understanding of God, there is another way? And this is what I'll say to them. I believe in a gracious God, a loving God. I believe in a God that thinks beyond my little brain, my little understanding of who God is. But one thing that we know for sure, we have the Bible in front of us. God gives us this word. This word points us, like the little cross that I gave the children, it points us to Jesus. That is what the word says, so that is what we do. Is God greater than our understanding even of Jesus? Maybe. But for those who know, we take the scripture and we say, this scripture we believe in. God has that gift that we have been given. And today, we too should ask the question of what we believe and how we believe that. But not only that, we should ask those around us what they believe. We had a devotions this week in our office, and it was a simple devotions about prayer. And the question was, have you ever asked your unchristian friends to pray for them? And the whole conversation was, when you do that, it creates conversation about faith and about understanding and about God and about all these things that maybe we need to be about.